welcome to this executive webinar series, Modernizing for Strategic Success. My name is Diadwana. I'm representing the Authors Club, and I will be also your master of ceremonies for today's webinar. Before we start, just to give you an idea for those who are not familiar with us, the Authors Club runs executive knowledge sharing discussion and corporate masterclasses globally. And what we do is we bring together an intimate group of executives or professionals to learn and talk about specific business. Of course, this event wouldn't be possible without someone supporting it. And in today's case, we are very lucky to have Thoughtworks for giving us the opportunity to bring everyone together for this exciting webinar today. We will be hearing from them later, but I would just like to touch briefly upon the agenda. As in a few minutes, we will be having a short presentation from our host, Thoughtworks, and this discussion will last approximately 1 hour, so let's make the most out of it. This session will be recorded, so should anyone want a copy afterwards, or for those who are not able to make it, we will be able to share it upon request. Of course, basic virtual rule, if anyone wants to ask a question throughout the session, please make the most out of question and answers feature on the Zoom. And with that being said, I would like to introduce our amazing moderator for today. Thomas, take it away.
Thank you for taking the opportunity to join us today. Our focus today is going to talk about transforming mainframes to drive agility and growth. As we all are aware, mainframes as a kind of part of the operating environment for most enterprises is really that systems of record and systems of differentiation components. These foundation systems are core to how an organization recognizes revenue from either order to cash, manages inventory, or just essentially the foundation components of how the business operates, whether that be around things like supply chain or even the financial accounting of the organization. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how do we adapt these systems over time in an incremental fashion. Where Thoughtworks as an organization really kind of moves away from this notion of big bang, and we like to take an incremental approach to be able to drive business value in a repeatable fashion where it could be recognized on an ongoing basis. We're also going to talk a little bit about how we align the business priorities and an IT modernization program that specifically touches these foundation systems for the enterprise. And this ultimately gives the ability to not only apply artificial intelligence in the development and delivery of these solutions, but also to the data that comes out of them as an area of differentiation for the organization. We think of AI in 3 loops inside Thoughtworks. One of them, the initial loop, is that inner loop is around software engineering and the application of the software development lifecycle around how we would actually do a modernization. The middle loop is around business processes and the things that actually affect the business. And the last area is that customer experience and how we would actually approach that. But with that, I'm going to focus on introducing our panel today. And with us, we have Tom Cogrev, Ed Hyatt, and Rajesh Ramachandran from Thoughtworks, Mechanical Orchard, and Google, respectively. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Tom to introduce himself and maybe a little bit of context for your role in this area, and then we can hand it off to Ed from there.
Thanks, Thomas. Yes, my name is Tom Cogrev. I'm a principal technologist here with Thoughtworks. My main focus for Thoughtworks is helping our clients on their journey to exit or kind of pay down some of the risks that they have around their mainframe. My primary focus is helping our teams and helping our clients discover and deliver on programs of work to exit them. Thanks very much.
Ed?
Well, I'm Edward Hyatt. I'm on the leadership team for a company called Mechanical Orchard, which is a software company building a platform that takes a very different approach to mainframe modernization that kind of Thomas outlined there, the incremental approach that attempts to de-risk the modernization of mainframes aggressively. We think we're onto some good ideas in partnership with Thoughtworks and Google.
Excellent. And with that, Rajesh?
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for taking time. My name is Rajesh Ramachandran. I lead the mainframe modernization practice in Google. I'm responsible globally. Been in Google for about 5 years and excited to be part of this panel discussion here.
Excellent. So with that, Rajesh, maybe we could contextualize for the audience how Google kind of organizes its approach to a mainframe modernization. This is a very obviously complex area with a lot of different options for how we would approach this. Maybe you could contextualize or give us some kind of framing for how Google looks at this.
Sure. Thomas. Thanks. And like you mentioned earlier in the introduction, right, this mainframe modernization space is very complex. A lot of customers are at various parts, various stages of maturity, right? And there are large organizations with a large footprint. From a Google perspective, we do not believe there's a one size fits all solution. And we actually have to adapt what we've realized working over the last few years at Google. So as you can see in the slide, we actually have solutions ranging from rehost, which is managing your mainframe with a partner near a Google data center, to all the way to the extreme to replacing software portions with third-party packages, right? So we actually have a wide spectrum of solution offerings, which help customers meet various different needs. Rehost meaning I need to quickly exit my data center, right? So that's predominantly the goal, and we know we cannot do that in 2 years, 3 years. It might take a longer time for a larger customer. Then we have solutions where customers are happy with the mainframe. They just want to augment the mainframe and build newer capabilities. So we have capabilities there. Then we have customers who are actually are happy with being in COBOL, who just want to get away from the increasing costs that actually has affected all these customers. And so then we have an option of working with those customers and saying re-platform solutions. Then comes, there are some customers who come in and say, I don't have skills, mainframe development skills in the market. So can I at least quickly migrate the platform to a modern language, which is cloud ready? And so then we look at it from a refactor, and we have a first party solution. And then, of course, we have partner solutions there. And then, of course, the latest things that we are actually heavy investment is that's being done here is where we are actually partnering with Mechanical Orchard on AI-based rewrite, where customers are now looking at saying, hey, can I get better quality code that comes out of this whole transformation that you're going forward with, but also minimize my risk and do it in an incremental way. And so that's where our entire focus is, where we are actually spending a lot of investment in, and we're working with partners like Thoughtworks and Mechanical Orchard actively in this. So that's the AI-based rewrite. Google also has its own proprietary AI-based rewrite solution, and that's essentially aimed at people who really want to reimagine the business process or change the business process as part of this whole journey as well. So as you can see, we have a gamut of solutions, spread across all of this space. And then most importantly, behind all of these migrations, we understand that, when we talk to all these enterprise customers, they're risk averse. So the majority of the fear that customers have is, hey, when I migrate, am I going to be in the news? People don't have a lot of test data, test cases, and people spend a lot of time doing all of this when they're doing this migration. And that's where Google understands that, and we have this dual run, which will actually help in de-risking this migration. So that is the context for us, and we understand the challenges customers have, and people will take various routes in their journey of modernization, and we believe that no one size fits all. So that's all I have from that point. Thomas, over to you.
Excellent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into a couple questions. Thank you for that framing, Rajesh. So one of the things that we are seeing, and I think that you touched on this, is that because of the criticality of these systems, we know that there is not a lot of appetite for either performance degradation or having it be not complete in that regard. But when we think about this in the context of like a business priority, and we're aligning a modernization initiative to that, maybe what we could think about is how do we factor this into being able to get incremental value? And maybe I'm going to throw that one first to Ed. When we go after an initiative, when you think about that incremental value and how do you build a business case around this, what are some of the dimensions to consider from that perspective?
Yeah, great. I think this is at the heart of how we're all thinking collectively about approaching this age-old problem, right? This is not a new challenge, but I think in the past, the approaches have kind of focused on a big bang translation and kind of, if I could, just cross your fingers and put it in production and hope it all works. And that's not been successful, right? That's a cartoon image, but that's kind of how it's been in the past. I think we're all very committed here to two different ways of thinking about approaching this problem. One, as you mentioned, Thomas, is what's the business importance right now? What's the focus from the business point of view? And very often there's some line of business or some business stakeholder who's interested in innovating on an existing application, adding more functionality, changing something aggressively to compete in the market, to do better for their customers. And so the idea of focusing on the business priority and then attacking the modernization of just that sort of subset of the overall behavior, as opposed to the whole technical problem, is really valuable to the business. Now that's difficult because how do you isolate only a certain part of the mainframe? And then how do you modernize just that part of the mainframe for the sake of ongoing innovation, right? And that is kind of the heart of what we're all attempting to do. The way we go about it is one, to figure out the dependency graph, right? And that there is some use of AI tooling there commonly that we're doing. And number two, perhaps most importantly, how do we give confidence to the business that we're not breaking anything as we do it, right? As we modernize this component or this subset of the mainframe. And the sort of innovation in modernization that we're all excited about on this call as partners really is that we think there's a way to do that safely, right? Which comes down to proving equivalence of that subset through a capture of existing behavior, and that is captured through data flows and the manipulation of the data by the existing system component, and then proving the equivalence in terms of data manipulation of the modernized component, right? So those two things, it's isolating a certain subgraph of the overall mainframe the business cares about today, and then proving the equivalence of the newly created code so that there's confidence that nothing's been broken along the way. Those are two fundamental different approaches we think are working well.
Perfect. And I'm going to hand this off to Kagi in a minute. And what I'd like to do is think about we've worked together on projects where we have to develop the business case. And there's certain metrics that in that work that you need to be able to focus in on. Maybe, Kagi, if you could tell us a little bit about that notion of not only what are the key variables that you would look at, but also what would be the metrics that you would actually set up a program like this from your lens. I mean, you've been through this probably. You and Rajesh have been through this probably more than most folks combined. So
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I guess when considering a business case, obviously some of the first indicators that people will reach for will obviously be the financial ones. We do need to see some sort of some kind of upside to the transformation costs that we're looking to take on to achieve this program of work. So particularly, a lot of folks will reach to TCO, total cost of ownership, to make sure that the new system is operating at a much better kind of rate than it was on the mainframe. However, that's kind of not the only one that can be hard to factor in other concerns like business agility and also staff retention, customer satisfaction, and time to market as well. So we found it's important to make sure we build in those other concerns and make sure that we're kind of communicating the overall positive nature of that business case, and that's something that we can get the relevant CXOs at an organization behind as well. So, looking at business agility, deep diving just into that one as an example, things that we're looking at from a leading indicators perspective might be something like cycle time or deployment frequency. So linked through to those kind of 4 key metrics that in fact Google have published a lot of kind of work and papers and research about, all the way through to, I guess, cost of delay, which is a slightly more kind of financial metric, like how much are we losing out on by not having these features that we've been waiting on in production. So I think I would look across those whole set of metrics to be able to communicate the value and the cost of doing such a transformation.
Perfect. So with that, maybe Rajesh, in the context, you get to see kind of across a very wide landscape of different, approaches. We, Thoughtworks, Mechanical Orchard, and Google are really focused on one area. But when you think about these in the context of, mainframe modernization as it relates to, applying all these tools, what are some successes that you've seen, or what are characteristics of successful programs that you've seen inside from your lens?
So from a perspective of success, right? To be honest, I'll tell you, I'll always use examples of some couple of customer references that we've had, where one is a commitment to the journey, right? This mainframe modernization is a very complex undertaking. So there is going to be a lot of challenges. There is going to be a lot of things that we will find out as we go along. And so there's got to be a little bit of a commitment to the journey, understanding that we are going to have these challenges and we are going to tackle them. Right? That's number one. Number two is finding the right partners, right? So I would say that customers need to find the right partners from a delivery perspective, because you know mainframe modernization has a lot of services behind it, right? It's not just tools alone, right? Tools play a very important role, but I think a partner who can do good amount of services is a second part of having, is very critical for having that success. And the third one, of course, is then finding the partner with the right technology and the options and the agility to move fast, right? So in our case, I would say, Thoughtworks is a great example of a services company that can help in delivering this. And then Mechanical Orchard and Google are companies that have technology that can move at a rapid pace that can help in doing this. These three things are very important from a success perspective, in my personal
And I'll plus one of those is that having a courageous leader that's willing to invest in the long-term success of a program like this. We're not talking about an 18-month program here. We're talking about something that is, a large time horizon. And then if we think about it, I'm going to contextualize this around incremental business value. So we all believe that there is an incremental approach to how you could drive this value. But in a large change program, it's measured in typically quarters and years in that regard. But when we think about kind of the incremental modernization being an alternative to the Big Bang, I think that we definitely believe in the incremental modernization over the Big Bang. But what I want to do is maybe I'm going to throw this to Kagi, and when we think about this approach, what maybe we could talk a little bit about the grain size of what that increment might look like from your lens, having been through these programs and set them up and so on. What maybe are the key drivers for how you would actually look at that from a grain size and aligning to that business value?
Yeah, so I think in terms of aligning to business value, I guess like just pick up that point first before I kind of answer the first bit second, as it were. I guess aligning to business value for me, that's all about identifying, if we've got some strategic goals that one of our clients is, or that our clients are looking to achieve, almost working down from that to understand kind of like what the systems and almost down to the very low level of those systems that are needed to change to be able to achieve those strategic goals and achieve that business value. And once we have that in mind, the grain size, I think, depends on some of the transaction costs that can be associated with these modernization programs as we move, say, a certain workload or set of workloads through into a production environment and cut them over. And I guess in the past, before the kind of the advent of a lot of these. Of the advent of a lot of the platforms and generative AI tools that Google and Mechanical Orchard are bringing, that grain size may have been somewhat bigger. We may have been looking more at a whole business capabilities worth of work that we need to take through to be able to take through with a reasonable transaction cost to then put that into a production environment and begin sort of making the changes the business requires. Now that's, I guess, moving much more towards the smaller end of the scale. I think as Edward will probably chime in and say, like we're now looking to move even down to the jobs or screens level within a mainframe, and do it taking as much on board as we need to be able to then iterate quickly once we've kind of got that into the production environment.
Perfect. So I'm going to just put a little more shape on that before I hand it off to Edward. Is that when we think about the grain size being able to instill trust in this project. So as you see incremental delivery, what techniques are you observing in the implementation at Imogen, at Mechanical Orchard, in the implementation at various customers? How are you building that trust? What's the mechanism by which you're actually able to go and say, hey, we're confident and you can be confident in this as well as the business stakeholder? Ed?
Yeah. So exactly. Sorry, I thought you were talking to Tom there for a second. Yeah. So you're putting your finger on exactly sort of the heart of how I think we collectively think there can be a new way of approaching this problem, like I mentioned before. And you mentioned Imogen, Mechanical Orchard platform that embodies sort of the overall process there. The basic idea is that because, as I mentioned, in the past, some of these efforts have failed or have trouble, because of the lack of confidence in the equivalent behavior being produced or not, right? We're really zoning in on that as a primary thing to solve technically. So how is it that you can prove that rewritten code, whether it's human rewritten or usually now Gen AI rewritten code, um, coming from a misunderstood, complicated Byzantine legacy code base, how do you know that that component you're rewriting is actually the same behavior as the old? Now, these are systems that it really, really matters that it's exactly the same, right? There's a million business rules. There's a lot of money flowing through the systems, as you mentioned, Thomas, at the beginning. So it really matters that there's confidence and trust that the migration to a new code base, say a cloud native code base in the cloud, is not going to break something or change something or break an integration, for example, right? That kind of that confidence is what we're trying to inspire in the customer. So the idea and what Imagen encapsulates as a process, end-to-end process as a platform is to having isolated which components matter to the business first, um, to capture data flows in and out of quite a low granularity of component. Take the famous batch job in a mainframe. What manipulations of data is the batch job doing night after night after night, right? Or in the case of a transactional screen, whenever the submissions happen, right? So you can imagine a batch job running at 2 a.m. We're going to capture data state before and after, whether that's database, file, queue, et cetera, right? And do that night after night after night, perhaps for 2 to 3 months. You can actually get sort of 80, 90% complete happy path scenarios captured fairly quickly after, say, 2 months in most cases for high volume workloads anyway. Having captured that data, you've really got a specification for what the behavior of that component is, right? You've really kind of captured almost like a test harness that defines what that thing does, right? So forget the code for a minute, just look at the data manipulations. Then generate the new code, often using Gen AI techniques. Be aggressive. Take the old COBOL and JCL, for example, and make it into great modern Java. We all know we can't really trust the AI, right? It might hallucinate, etc. But we can say to it, go to town, make great cloud native, idiomatic, say Java. Knowing that we can then have another agent show up and push those same data flows through the candidate component and compare their output, right, to what the original system is doing, both in terms of accuracy of data manipulation and critically performance, right? And often there'll be something wrong that the AI got wrong. You can have a conversational agentic back and forth, though, to correct that and end up with this great high quality code that's provably equivalent with respect to that test harness that you have, right? So that's kind of the major insight that we think is giving customers a lot more confidence in proceeding, doing it incrementally, and actually living in the state that Gartner has referred to as continuous modernization, where you've got some components, still on the mainframe, maybe for a long time, maybe that's a steady state, maybe forever in some cases. Other components that are high business value to innovate on that have been modernized, that are running in the cloud, and there's some hybrid situation with data flows, et cetera, set up such that you can live comfortably in that world and at your own choice, modernize some older stuff or innovate on the new rewritten components. That's the kind of vision we're all shooting for. Make this a state of being, hybrid, new and old, as opposed to a project that's one and done and has high risk.
So I'm going to just recap quick. So what you're describing is that, so you're looking at the data flows, the change data capture, you're taking the code as an input, the business logic for the organization. And then from there, taking a non-deterministic view to create a code asset that is modernized. And then you're running a test harness that is very much deterministic, locked down. It's running a predictable set over a period of time. You might iterate non-deterministically if the test harness fails, but then once it goes through and achieves equivalence, it would be then promoted from there. And at that point, you've essentially gone from origin on the mainframe to destination as a cloud native application. So, and you're not having to do the whole system at that point. So with that, I'm going to ask Kagi a question that's related to that, is what happens for those items that fall outside of the ideal happy path? Not everything that we can see is going to be a candidate for that perfect kind of workflow. What happens when we're having to address something that might not fit that profile. Do we have anything like, from your perspective about how we would approach something that's not a good candidate for Imogen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it begins, I think that journey for working out what is and what isn't a good candidate for these tools kind of begins with the discovery process, right? We need to first of all understand everything that's there, understand the inventory of work that's kind of workloads that are there on the mainframe to then determine which kind of approach to take. I guess the first tools we'd look to use to kind of determine that would be a combination of ThoughtWorks' own kind of AI tool, Code Concise, for doing code discovery and intelligence, but also using tools like Google's mainframe assessment tool to then determine kind of determine and understand what those things are present. Once we have that in hand, then we've kind of bucketed up the work into those different approaches. If it's not something that's right for Imogen, we would use a combination of Google's mainframe kind of rewrite tooling and other kind of processes like Code Concise's kind of support for forward engineering to then move forwards for those components that don't fit in that, and then support that with dual run as Rajesh was sharing at the start of the call. I think that approach that takes both those the best of both worlds and allows us to tackle it in the most effective way for the client situation. I mean, it's fair to say that there's such a sprawl of different technologies available in the mainframe that there's never going to be one tool that covers every single eventuality. And so you need to be able to pull from all partners and pull from all kind of like options in the market to be able to achieve the mainframe modernization program in a swift and timely and cost-effective manner.
Perfect. So, Rajesh, you did mention dual run earlier, and if you think about that as a way to de-risk the clients that are going through this, maybe you could unpack that a little further on what is dual run and how is it actually able to be a foundation component to this journey for customers that are investing in Google as their destination cloud.
Sure. Thanks, Thomas. That's actually a very interesting question, and actually something very important that customers need, and partners need to understand is typically when we do these mainframe migrations, it's pretty complex. It takes a long time, and a lot of cases, a lot of this code has been written a long time ago. There's not enough SME knowledge in the customer environments. Typically, a lot of customers don't necessarily have test cases and test data in the legacy environment. So a lot of time is spent by customers to actually go and create these test cases, identify test data. That takes a lot of time and then actually prolongs these migrations. And even at that point, you're still not sure if you have tested every possible angle that happens in production in the real world in your environment. Customers are not sure. And this is very critical, especially if you're talking banks in a regulated industry, right? Banks, financial institutions like insurance companies, right? And even in retail, I would say it's actually pretty important, where they actually want to know, okay, my system is actually behaving. I have a business that I'm doing this. These systems actually support the business. So I really want that to be, when I do this migration, I should be 100% sure that there's no risk to it. So that's where this dual run component comes in. So the idea here is you have your mainframe system on the left, and you have your modernized system on the right side. So where dual run sits in is a set of interceptors that can intercept the workload that goes into the mainframe. Mainframe acts as your primary system. You capture the request and the response from the mainframe, you log it, then you forward the same request to the modernized system, and you capture the response back, and then you do the comparisons. And similarly, mainframe has batch as well. So at the end of the day, you can compare the outputs from both the systems from the database perspective, database and files. Dual run supports different protocols, MQ, HTTP 3270, as well as we can actually also compare data in EBCDIC to CSV to JSON. So it allows customers to actually de-risk their migration. So instead of spending a lot of time identifying test cases and test data, I'm not saying don't do that, but I'm saying do it only for the critical pieces, not for every piece. And what this allows customers is a faster and a more risk-free migration going forward. That's what dual run plays. And that's why we firmly believe, and it's actually a differentiator from a Google Cloud perspective, right? Nobody else in the industry has the equivalent solution. And we have customer references. We have Santander, we have Intesa, who have actually presented at Next, who have actually used this solution and have shown how it actually helped them get regulatory approval as well. So in my opinion, it's like a must-have solution if you're doing any mainframe modernization.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to take some questions that we got from the audience, and we got two that I'm going to kind of combine. And Rajesh, this one's probably going to come back to you as well for our first answer. Is that one's just relative to like the modernization journey. There's all these opportunities for rehost, rewrite, refactor, and so on and so forth as it kind of relates. And when you think about cost versus risk, or essentially, I think that risk, let's say risk versus cost more appropriately, because this is such a high value system in that regard. But do you have any kind of complexity thresholds that you look at, or is there kind of a workflow that you look through the organization or look through the program when you're actually making that kind of recommendation, or is it entirely based on the business case or business outcomes that need to be driven?
I would say, cost is always a factor for migration, but that's where with the evolution of technology and, the advances that AI has made, right? So we can actually speed up these migrations. So cost can be addressed to a point. Where it becomes very important for customers to, and actually to be successful, is identify what is business critical, right? Those applications you want to modernize and you want to rewrite. And there is going to be some cost towards it, but with the advances in AI, like I said, that can be minimized. The risk factor, as I said, we have solutions for that, right? With the advent of dual run, so we can actually mitigate the risk. So that shouldn't be a factor in doing this. It should be more, what is my business objective? Identify which applications want to be rewritten, which applications can remain maybe on the mainframe, right? Like Edward was saying, forever, right? And that's fine. It's those systems are good platforms, right? There's nothing wrong with the mainframe per se. And then there'll be some things that you might want to say, okay, I'm happy to be off the platform in COBOL, staying in replatform, or I'm happy to go to a modern language, depending on your skills, your organizational skills capability, where you're finding challenges. Those are all the things that need to be taken into consideration, in my personal opinion, right? It's not about just cost versus risk, because I think we have solutions to mitigate the risk, right? It's more about understanding your business objectives.
Excellent, thank you.
If you don't mind, Thomas, I'll just jump in as well. I mean, I'd just add on to that. I mean, I agree with Rajesh completely there. I think I'd probably just add on and say the other factor that we commonly talk about is along the lines of how differentiating a certain application or capability or system is on that mainframe as well. Particularly when you're looking to mainframes, a lot of what they run is they are core business processes, but they can. But a lot of these core business processes typically have large companies out there who provide those services or software that can be used in place of that. And so when you're looking, when considering a mainframe modernization, I think it's critical to look at how differentiating that capability is and decide whether you want to do a buy versus build on that as well. Because one factor to take into account is should you really be owning that piece of code at the end of it yourself, or should you have offloaded something non-differentiating, very commodity onto a SaaS provider or a COTS product too?
So I want to just unpack that a little bit further. So one of the things that we see out there is, my observation is that when we go through a mainframe modernization, we almost treat the applications running on the mainframe as their own portfolio. So if you think about it from that perspective, is it that the business value is just, so you're essentially weighting the business value, impact, and so on and so forth. There could be COTS solutions out there like SAP or other solutions that are good candidates for these. So in the tooling that you and your team have built, obviously Matt is a part of that, Code Concise is part of that, Imogen has its own pieces and parts. How are you kind of looking fit for purpose in that? What would be like what would be a signal that says, hey, you know what, this is not a good candidate for modernization. This is a good candidate for maybe replatforming to a more of a COTS solution.
Yeah. Sorry, go on, Rajesh.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, okay, fine. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, in particular, one of the pieces that we're most proud of that we built into our tooling these days is capability extraction. So obviously, when faced with a large mainframe, with a large mainframe estate and a large application estate, there, actually understanding at like a higher level what it is that that mainframe is doing is critical to be able to make these decisions, to be able to make these trade-offs. And so we've with our tooling, we've been able to pull out that business level, business kind of understanding about what's going on there, so that these decisions can be made. So you can then use that capability model or map of what's running that mainframe and evaluate it with suppliers and with partners out there. I guess that's combined with industry expertise from Google, from the kind of the verticals within Google, and also within Thoughtworks, to be able to see, what are we seeing our other clients, what are we seeing kind of moving in the industry that could be a good replacement for these capabilities. I think it's critical to make sure you have points in the program of discovery and delivery to evaluate those choices. Technology is evolving at a very rapid pace, and products and services are launching onto the market all the time that could be appropriate fits for these things. So even if it turns out that something's very commodity, every, let's say, automotive manufacturer is doing this thing, there may not be something quite there quite yet. But that's where evolutionary architecture and the way in which you structure the solution in the target environment allows you to switch in capabilities more easily in the future.
Excellent. Rajesh, any comment on that?
No, I think, Kagi covered it absolutely right. I think from our perspective, what I've seen is where I go look at it and say, like, when you have a complex insurance process or a complex bank, a large core bank, that banking system that is there, you might not want to rewrite that entire system or re-platform that entire system for a variety of reasons. And that's where these third-party packages and solutions come into play, right? And those are obvious choices there that can be made for customers. But then there are cases where some customers say, I'm working with a customer where they didn't want a product because it didn't meet the market demands in that particular geo, for example, right? It works very well some elsewhere, but it's not a perfect fit. So it's a trade-off, but that will be the other way to look at it.
Excellent. So I'm just going to switch gears a little bit. And like one of the reasons that a lot of organizations have started to address the mainframe is the fact that they're a population that understands the staffing population that understands the application is up in years, getting towards requirement. There's been people that have come into the organization, left the organization. You've got knowledge drain, and so on and so forth. But when we think about this, is it, Ed, is it your opinion from this view that this is a way of mitigating that talent gap, or that hollowing out that's starting to occur with people retiring out of their roles? I mean, maybe you could unpack that further on how we can actually use these tools to be able to get insight that drives and de-risks the organization ultimately. So
Absolutely, yeah, that's a primary driver, I'd say. One of them for many customers looking to address this age-old problem of mainframe modernization today. As you say, many times there's teams that have in large part retired, or at least have turned over so many times that very few understand the sort of whole system. Famously, there's a dynamic where there's sort of one person in the back room who really is the one holding it all together, who was there in the 80s when it was built, and even that person now is retiring. I think we've had a good couple of decades now where that's been a problem, but now we're at an extreme of that where there really are very few people left oftentimes who understand the system. So we're faced with a very high people side risk here. It isn't just that the code base is complex and difficult to get one's head around, it's that no one exists who really has it in their head. And so the motivation to move to a modern code base that's maintainable, innovatable on by the average modern developer is at an all-time high, I think, with respect to mainframes especially. I would even say it's sort of a balance sheet risk, right? If no one understands or can maintain the system, that is a existential risk for many organizations, right? If there's an audit that's happening, if there's some kind of a investigation of what went wrong, and no one can figure out what happened, that's a serious problem. And so people are, in fact, being forced in some cases to act just because of that, as well as business priorities to innovate on certain sets of code bases. Now, I think the approach that Mechanical Orchard has tended to favor is to jump all the way to cloud native as soon as possible, right? For those parts of the application that need it, right? As we've said already, not everything needs to move off the mainframe, but those parts that our desire to move off, how do you, as quickly as possible, get from the old situation to a brand new situation where the code is idiomatic, easily maintainable by humans or AI, provably equivalent, right? And how you do it incrementally. And that's why the solutions that we're all referring to here, including Mechanical Orchard's Imagen platform, take this approach of a jump towards cloud native, but then proving the equivalence, right? As opposed to a traditional approach, which might look more like a literal translation to something like a modern language, but that is more of a line by line, literal translation, which then requires another transformation to become readable, cloud native, etc. Right? So rather than doing it in two steps, we think there's a way to do it in one using Gen AI, but again, proving the equivalence through these data flow equivalence monitoring frameworks.
So just to unpack that a little further, I mean, so, if we're thinking about this, if COBOL is hard to understand for a limited set of folks, JOBOL is going to be even more difficult for them to understand. And what we're suggesting is that you go from COBOL to idiomatic Java or Python or whatever your kind of current cloud native language is.
Yeah.
So when you think about that from that perspective, what we're saying is that there needs to be some cloud native understanding or capability inside an enterprise that's going to take an initiative on of this characteristic. Which is more important from the panel's view? Is it COBOL knowledge or cloud native knowledge when you're going through this journey? Like, where do the balances sit from your view?
Sure. Well, obviously the easy answer is it's both. But I think we at Mechanical Orchard tend to think that while there is, some expertise, of course, needed in how mainframes have worked, the paradigms, technologies, the setup, etc., you have to have some of that knowledge, of course. But given that the future state, is usually desired to be full-on cloud native, right? We tend to think that the more that the tooling can automate the understanding of the old system and the generation of new code in a safe and provably equivalent way, better to keep your efforts focused people-wise on modern development environments. How do you make this thing into a convenient, sort of typical CI/CD, DevSecOps type of a process as quickly as possible? So keep your expertise in that realm, and use tooling to automate out of the old is the general approach we have.
Kagi, thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'd agree. I think when I think about, if I was to take kind of the team shaping kind of some of the team shaping principles that Thoughtworks espouses a lot of the time, we like to make sure that our teams are cross-functional in their makeup, right? And so that what that means to us is that they have all the skills within them that allow them to move as independently as possible. And so for me, it's about making sure that we have the right spread of people capabilities within that team to enable it to go fast, and supported by AI as much as possible, which will just change the balance of what that looks like within a team. So for us, having the right amount of forward engineering, right amount of kind of infrastructure engineering, and the right amount of security, also supported by some COBOL subject matter expertise or COBOL kind of reverse engineering in there is I think what we would aim for. AI changes that balance, right? These generative AI tools that changes the balance of what might have been needed 5-10 years ago to what's needed now, so that we can, especially with a dwindling workforce available to do with COBOL expertise, we can then still maintain and go at pace.
Excellent. Rajesh, any thought?
Yeah, actually, just echoing their thoughts. That's where the advent of AI has changed some of that. Where in the past you always needed, a combination of having definitely somebody who understood the old system. Why a lot of these legacy rewrites failed in the past was the fact that you didn't have SMEs who didn't, who understood the system. They also had to always read the COBOL program, figure out how to do all of this. With the advent of AI, like Google's MAT solution, for example, does a great job in documenting the actual what the code does today, right? So that gives you, and then you're able to use AI to extract business rules, which can be validated by product owners and business owners and not necessarily by a COBOL resource always. So that has changed the balance, right? The advent of AI has definitely changed it. And then combining it with the equivalence approach of Mechanical Orchard and then adding dual run to all of that actually mitigates, I would say, focus more on the Java side of the house. And you can, I'm not saying no to the COBOL knowledge, but you can minimize that a little bit, right? I think that's what I would say has happened in the industry.
Perfect, perfect. We obviously, some of the mainframe constraints are actually not just mainframe problems. We see these things with N-tier architectures, where either somebody might have any architecture, not just N-tier. So mainframe, N-tier architectures, cloud native systems, systems that go through journeys over time. But there are scenarios where the code just doesn't exist anymore, and that is, or the code's been compiled and it's running on a system, and basically the node is just do not touch this, do not shut this off, do not even breathe on it, like in that regard. So in that scenario where you're actually having to decompose a system, maybe Kagi or Ed, I'll start with Kagi first. What techniques do we use there? Is that an AI problem? Is that a classic first principles software engineering problem? How would you approach that kind of scenario? Because we do see it,
Yeah, it's one of the toughest challenges. I'm sure Ed will be able to chime in on this as well. I guess what some of the, I mean, if we're talking about true black box reverse engineering where we have no access to the code anymore, that is, that can be very, very difficult. I mean, I guess I would look to some kind of more hardcore kind of development tooling like decompilers or other sorts of software that can actually pull that back out. I'd look to observability. We'd look to kind of I guess checking input output and seeing how it's manipulating the things that it's connected to, so we can build up a picture and a pattern of what's going on there, and build up a test suite that kind of exercises that same thing, so we then know the behavior, the basis of the behavior that it has to be able to move forwards on. Yeah, it's truly a difficult challenge. Maybe Ed.
It's definitely difficult, and if you're out there thinking, yeah, I got some of that too, don't be embarrassed. It's amazing how many situations in our industry have code that's running there's no source for, or I've heard all sorts of stories. Source code was lost in a source control migration effort in the 90s, or the guy who wrote it left and took the code with him, or whatever. Right? There's a lot of reasons for this situation, but it is out there. As Kagi was saying there, it's complicated. It's a reverse engineering problem. The way I think about it is there's a role for AI here, perhaps. There's also just a role for human ingenuity. And to make it tractable, the only way you can really address this is to come down granularity to as a smaller component as possible, right? If you're looking at the big black box level of the whole system, it's impossible to try and figure out all the inputs and outputs and manipulations that happen. If you can come down to the lowest possible level, right, where you're really aware of what the inputs are, whether it's procedural calls or data input and output, and then you can again capture the data flows. You at least then have a target that's tractable and small enough to aim at and push inputs and outputs into to check your solution is accurate. And I have seen some good work and some successful work done in that realm through pure human ingenuity. I think that's where the state of the art probably is still today, but I think AI will help more and more, sort of fill in the obvious boilerplate there, and then you can have human ingenuity figure out the edge cases. Again, the more data you can collect, the more edge cases you can witness in production or synthesize in a staging environment, the safer that is. Right?
Definitely. Rajesh, any thoughts on this? I mean, I'm sure you've seen this scenario in your career.
In the career span 30 years, definitely have seen some of this happen. And the approach that we have seen is like what Kagi said, right? I mean, there's no real easy way of doing this apart from looking at inputs and outputs and then understanding what the businesses may be from somebody and then trying to build a new system on that. I mean, that's the approach I would take and I have taken in the past. I haven't had success decompiling it or trying to do any of those things, to be honest.
Perfect. So we did get one question that I want to address in the context of this slide. So I'm just going to read it off, and then we could kind of react to it as a group. When applying AI rewrite or reimagine strategies using these models, can you give thoughts on how to overcome the context window limitations? Something that we've all seen. We've seen it in every application that we've built, especially AI applications. Now, in large monolithic, the context window limitations in large monolithic mainframes, the average mainframe system being, over 10 million lines of code. and how critical prompt engineering and ensuring accurate preservation of business logic during the transformation. Any valuable information about reimagining or AI rewrite would be great. That's me adding some commentary to the question as well. But I think that, this is top of mind for folks. I'll go to Rajesh first, and then we can go to the rest of the panel from there. Rajesh, any thought?
Sure. Actually, yeah, so it's a great question, right? But I would say the approach is, and actually the approach that we take is, you're not going to rewrite all 10 million lines of code at one shot, right? So the approach should be to identify business processes and business functions that you want to modernize first. So that in itself will help you shrink the amount of input that you want to really focus on from a context window point of view, right? To identify the business rules, to identify code that you need to get translated. So that is an approach that we take to do this. To be honest, putting 10 million lines of code through that system and getting something is not necessarily going to be useful for you, right? So the approach is figure out a business process, narrow down the scope, and then start figuring out the programs that you need to do it, and then take that approach going forward.
I always come back to grain size, because if you start to take the entire corpus in one shot, it's gonna erode really quickly. But Kagi, thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess I can maybe point folks to we've done some explanation about kind of how we tackled this from a reverse engineering perspective on a public blog post on our chief scientist's blog. The approach is basically about using using the structure of the language that's there on the mainframes, be it COBOL, be it PL1, using language parsers to kind of further break that problem down. So even if you've got a grain size of, say, a single program, Thomas, in your kind of example, that that program can still be tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of lines long. That still can be far too big, even for the most recent kind of advanced LLMs and their context window sizes. And so for me, it's about using, and the technique that we use inside CodeConcise is about breaking that down, using the language parser to generate an abstract syntax tree, and then using that to drive walking through smaller parts of that before then reassembling that knowledge about the small parts into a whole. So that's kind of how we apply it in our reverse engineering process.
Perfect. Edward, any thoughts on this one?
I think Coggy said it well. I mean, one of the first questions we often get from people who try to sort of do this themselves, meaning use AI to translate code, is exactly this question, right? And as Rajesh says, of course, the first thing is how do you focus on some subcomponents as small as possible, right? And that get back to that whole what's the business priority. But as Tom says there, even the smallest batch job in some systems is 10,000 lines of code, which causes the average LLM today to choke, right? The context window problem is famous. So the question is, how do you give a Gen AI system a way of handling too much code for it effectively? It kind of loses the plot after a while, right? The AIs will develop. It's going to get better and better and bigger and bigger context windows. But at some point, it's almost always going to be the case. You've got to figure something out with humans. And as Kagi says, there's patterns in mainframe. There's ways of breaking down code bases and parsing them. That's what some of the Imagen implementation is, in fact, in our code generation team. It's all about how do you parse a large amount of code in such a way that the context window is small enough for today's LLMs to handle it, right? Again, it comes back to breaking it down, the granularity, as you mentioned. How do you get your arms around each of those subcomponents and prove that they're equivalent sort of the unit level, if you're familiar with unit and functional testing, and then putting it together and functional test it. And as Rajesh says at the end, the whole system with dual run or something like it can be the ultimate test. But that's the question. How do you parse it in such a way that you get all the go-tos and the ifs figured out?
Yeah. Well, I think the V model from the early aughts is coming back. When you start to see it kind of like, you have a testable pattern that is looking at an outcome in that regard. So the last area that we're going to talk about is like, how do organizations leverage strategic partnerships like this? I mean, there's a lot of different engagement models. They might have a relationship with Google. They might have a relationship with Thoughtworks. They might have a relationship with Mechanical Orchard. From Rajesh, maybe you could contextualize what your vision is for how we would approach one of these engagements as a combined team to be able to drive these outcomes for folks.
As I said before, right, one of the main critical success criteria, apart from having a vision and identifying the right workloads for the modernization, is having the right partners and the right technologies and the right platform. So if you look at, in fact, if you look at the slide that's been on screen, right, when you speak to any mainframe customer or any mainframe people in the organizations, they will always tout the reliability, availability, scalability of the platforms. So first and foremost, right, mainframes are great, they provide that, but cloud platforms like Google Cloud also provide equivalent qualities of service, similar availability, scalability, availability. I would even say some of the scalability is even better in cloud because you can do truly horizontal scaling, which might not be possible on the mainframe. And then on top of it, we have first-party solutions that Google has, which is vetted through a lot of customers. And then we have partner solutions, right? And that's where we work, especially in the AI space. We are working with Mechanical Orchard as one of our partners in the AI space, and they have a great product that helps you especially in the equivalence and getting them onto an idiomatic Java. It's actually a fantastic idea and solution that they are building towards, right? And then, as I said, services plays a very critical role in this, right? And that's where Thoughtworks comes into play. And Thoughtworks has all the pedigree. You're well known for being in the industry leaders. I've known Thoughtworks from when they were a small company, like 40-man company back in those days, to where you guys have evolved right now. So having all of that will help, and that's where we think combining the three of us together, we provide, we check all the boxes in terms of getting a platform, product, and services along with it for a complete successful mainframe modernization.
And I think the other aspect of this, and I think this is really important, is that our philosophical approach to software engineering and driving value for operational systems is aligned. So it's not like you have three organizations that have kind of incompatible gearing with their approach. Quite a few ThoughtWorkers have gone to Google, quite a few Googlers have come to ThoughtWorks, quite a few. So Mechanical Orchard, I would say your antecedent was Pivotal and Pivotal Labs. We have quite a few pivots that have come to ThoughtWorks and also are working as mechanics on the team. So we see enough free communication of ideas that we're not going to look at the problem, have somebody that's just like, I just don't believe in this as a way of working and driving value. So I think that's an important aspect of this. So throughout the context of the conversation, we did answer all the questions that came in from the group. But with that, I just want to offer to the panel maybe any closing thoughts. I mean, I'll hand it to each of you, and then what we could do is close this out. We've got about 3 minutes left. With that, I'll hand it to Ed. Maybe any closing thoughts or areas that we might not have focused on in the context of the panel.
Yeah, sure, Thomas. Well, I think I'll bring up a term that I think I've heard you use quite a bit, which is that this whole challenge of mainframe modernization to cloud native is a socio-technical problem. That's a phrase that we've all used a lot, right? It's about the people, the commitment, the willingness, as much as it is about the technology, the automation, right? And I think Rajesh, you mentioned this as well. There has to be a real commitment because this is difficult. It's going to take a lot of change and a lot of decisions and a lot of times when it's going to feel like risk, right? But I think we all feel that the tipping point has been reached in our industry. Like we have to make progress here because the risk of not making progress is now outweighing the opposite, right? So having commitment to moving forward, sort of come hell or high water, I think does matter. But we're not talking about just do the old thing harder, like try harder, do it more, right? We've actually got a different way of thinking about this, which comes down to a culture that Thomas just mentioned, but in all three companies here, which is a commitment to doing this incrementally and safely, right? How do we make this boring is really what we're trying to do, as opposed to a high risk, cross your fingers kind of approach. And so, if you're looking at how to approach these kind of challenges, I'd say you really need to be looking at a different way of thinking, right? Because it would be different, wouldn't it, if it was going to be successful this time? And that's what I think the technologies and the culture we've talked about today represent.
Excellent. Kagi, any thoughts?
I mean, no, that was a great summary. I think I'd only add, I mean, just or amplify kind of what Edward's saying about like having the commitment and pushing forwards with it. You need to, I think that's the benefit that, again, echoing the benefit of the incremental approach is that having that courageous executive who can push this stuff forwards, but also see results over a horizon that's within the scope of, within the scope of the role that they're running right now, I think is the most powerful thing. And I think being able to construct that program is where I think this group of folks that are on the call today can really help.
Excellent. Rajesh, any thoughts in closing?
I'm just excited, right? It's actually a pretty exciting time right now, compared to what it was maybe even 2, 3 years ago in terms of mainframe modernization, right? There was a lot of interest always for migrating. It's actually an holy grail problem in the industry, to be honest. But I think with the advent of AI, it has changed it, right? It has truly changed it and provided a way forward for customers to help migrate off the get, to get them migrated off the mainframe. So I'm very excited about this, right? I mean, I think, that's the main thing that's happening right now. And I think in the next year or two, you'll see a lot more people starting this journey, and succeeding in this, actually.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I want to say thank you to all of our panelists, and I want to say thank you to Ortus Club for hosting us. And I hope everybody that attended this was valuable to you, and thank you for taking the time. With that, we're going to close this out.